the most interesting part. So someone like experienced 4 years in a generalist role. They did like a work on like research, normal end-to-end flows, and like service design and design system. And now they want to come into design. And then it's going to be a organic transition that you have based on the gaps that you identify. So that can be one possibility, that you move towards a specialist role, being either design system or accessibility or research. On the design system, yes, there are many opportunities that you may identify as there is no design system. So I may be proactive and propose that I'm looking for. So if you're looking for a design system position, you must show some examples that you have applied on your previous jobs that.
Hi, Andrei. Thank you so much for coming to the podcast, and I'm super excited to have you. So, today's conversation topic is about background and hiring. What I meant was what background you have to have in order to become a UX designer, education, or if you're transferring. So, before I dig more into the conversation, I want you to introduce yourself to the audience.
Hi, Yash. Yes, thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure to be here talking with you. About me, I am currently a design manager at HP. I manage the design system, and it's been 10 years that I've been working with HP. From that journey, I worked as a front end developer, then designer, and then I moved to the design system scope as design system lead, and then now design manager. And before that, I worked also as a graphic designer while I was doing my bachelor's in computer science. That's my career path in a nutshell.
That's a lot of transitions, I would say. Three transitions. So let's start from the beginning, right? You said, if I understood right, you started your career as a graphic designer. So how did you transfer from graphic designer to developer? What are the transferable skills? What are the challenges? And the third point I want you to cover is what is the bridging skill you need to learn?
Skills that I really used when I moved from graphic design to development was the foundations of design. When I started as a developer, I started as a front end and back end developer at the same time, a mixed role, but mostly front end. And all the design foundations that I learned while doing graphic design, for example, Gestalt, how to organize a or to how to compose a piece of graphic design like a flyer or something, that was all transferable to the front end development. So spacing, hierarchy, usage of typography, colors, importance of colors, those were all skills that were transferred. And challenges that I've had, the main one was the dynamics of it. So, graphic design is mostly static. You design it, it's for a specific size, and that's it. It doesn't move. For UI development and front end, it's dynamic. You need to develop something that will work in many screen sizes. And that was one of the biggest challenges, learning the details on how to scale the design from static to being dynamic and also different platforms.
So what skills did you think you have to develop from the scratch when you move to development, from graphic design to development, apart from coding? That's a no-brainer. So what are the
Right.
skills did you have to develop?
The first one that comes to my mind is organization of elements and responsive design and responsive code. So, grid system, learning how an element or object is going to adjust from one size to another, from one screen size to another, or changing or replacing content. That was one of the biggest ones.
So then you again moved from development to design. So now tell me, how did graphic design and development skills transfer into design?
Cool. So that was a natural transition for me because the more I worked on the development, the more I shifted towards front end development. That was the area that I liked the most. And up to a certain point, I was doing a mixed role again as front end developer and designer. So I was doing flows, working with product managers, gathering the feedback and translating into all possible UI flows and also developing it. So it was a natural shift, and I've had the opportunity to then shift completely from that role to a product designer role. The transition, although natural, I also faced some challenges,
Mhm.
and those were learning more about research, learning more about the beginning of the process for design ideation. That was an area that I haven't had the experience at the time, and then I was able to grow while also applying the technical skills that I've had up to that point. So, really, beginning of the process, that was a challenge when I moved from development to product design.
So, if I understood right, now you're a design system specialist. So, when you transition completely to design, you transition to product design, like a generalist design instead of design system. I have a question for you because you transitioned twice and you came into design, because like you have worked with the front end development, right? And also you have strong UI skills. You could have gone to design system directly. That would be even a natural transition. What do you think a best, because there was so many UX roles, if someone is transitioning or just graduated, even though someone is very good and did so many internships,
Yep.
irrespective of the field they are coming from or the experience they have, until they don't have like direct UX experience, work experience, what role would be the best for them? Because there is a research role, junior research role, junior, I don't know, I never seen like junior UI designer, but I never seen junior design system expert because it's a complex thing. Ex generalist roles, service, junior service designer role. There were a number of roles in the UX, right? What do you think is the best role for someone coming into UX if they don't know much about it?
Sure. I think at the beginning of a career path for UX, the best option is to explore a generalist role, as it will offer you a huge umbrella of possibilities. So when starting in UX design, I believe that going for a more generalist role would be better so you can experiment, but all the areas that it offers, including possibly research. I know research is its own discipline, but sometimes it's included. Visual design, product design, service design, then go into more specific roles like accessibility or even responsive design as an area to become a specialist on. And then you can define, you can think of what you like the most and deep dive in one of them. That would be my advice on anyone that is starting the career right now, and then really experimenting, trying new things, and then finding what you like the most.
The best way is to come as a junior into UX generalist role because like they learn more about it. So okay, let's take this conversation more into design system side, right?
Sure.
That would be the most interesting part. So someone like experienced like 4 years in a generalist role, they did like a work on like research, normal end-to-end flows, and like service design and design system. And now they want to come into design system. So we said a junior design system, say like design system expert, senior design system expert, lead design system expert. So there's no junior, it starts from mid. So let's assume that. So how do they get a design system role from a generalist to design system? Because everyone knows we need a portfolio. So let's start with the portfolio part, right? How do they build a portfolio for a design system role?
Yeah, and sometimes it's not even a transition from one company to another. It could be within the same company. So you may be building your skills and there is an opportunity to move to the design system team or to start a design system if it's not established. And then it's going to be a organic transition that you have based on the gaps that you identify. So that can be one possibility, that you move towards a specialist role, being either design system or accessibility or research. On the design system, yes, there are many opportunities that you may identify as there is no design system. So I may be proactive and propose that. So that can be a possible transition from a product designer to a design system specific role. Another is there is a design system established. You do some networking and you create some connections with people that work there, and you identify the gaps and you start working, contributing to the design system. And there may be a possibility to move. So there is this scenario as well. When we are talking about I am a, let's say, a product designer and there is no opportunity for a design system, I really would like to move to a design system, then it goes to your question on the creation of the portfolio. How do I assemble my portfolio? So to move from one position to another, when you need to look for external opportunity, you need to create or update your portfolio accordingly. That's for any role. For design systems, what is really important is to have a clear direction of what you were looking for. So, you're looking for a design system position, you must show some examples that you have applied on your previous jobs that is towards design systems. Even though you don't have experience in design system, you may have transferable, and you will certainly have transferable skills that can be applied to design system. Consistency is the first one that comes to my mind. So in any previous job, have you ever done something that helped creating consistency in a flow, in the UI, in a use case? So that can be transferred into a case to your portfolio that show you know how important it is consistent
Mm.
for a determined case. And that is one way to assemble a use case on your portfolio to show that you have the skills to move to design system. Another really important point to highlight in a portfolio for any applicant of design system is how you are actually crafting your portfolio. As a manager, when I'm hiring a designer for the design system, the first thing that I look at is at the landing page of the candidate. And it's really important that the landing page and entire portfolio is well crafted. Consistency, again, having consistency well balanced right there will tell me right away that the foundations of design. And that's really important for any design role, but especially for design system positions. So having your portfolio well crafted, it's crucial, and it's your visit card. It must be really well formatted and presentable.
So I think I want to go even deeper. Let's start with the general design system role, right? Not the senior role. We can build upon it. So let's start with the portfolio because that's the deal breaker actually that either gets you in or you're out. So what case studies, or let's say like how should a portfolio for a design system perspective, you as you're a hiring manager, what do you think the best way to structure your portfolio? So from very high level, let's divide what pages should a portfolio should have. Landing page, contact page. So the mic is over to you.
Sure. Yeah. For a portfolio that is looking for a design system position, I think, yes, landing page is really important.
Mhm.
And having a clear summary of what you are looking for, just a brief description of the position or what you are doing, then having the cases and highlighting two, three cases that are important to the position that you are looking for. And again, showing how those cases impact the area that you are looking for.
Mhm.
In, for example, if you're looking for a generalist role for design systems, showing a case that you've worked and then you created a UI, and on that UI you needed to create components for that application. So even though there may be not a design system, you were working in creating a reusable set of assets or components, and that can be transferred to a design system case. Or if you worked in a project that had a design system, showing how you were able to contribute to the design system. So that can be another case. There are many points that you can explore and isolate from previous experiences and create a case focused on design system.
And say, okay, landing page should have a summary. So summary is basically like what you're doing, what's your current role, and what do you want to do, like what's your expertise. Because if you're a design system, you can say design system generalist. If you're a generalist, so we're talking about. And then the case study is 2 to 3, the impact. So before I want to really go a bit deeper, if that's okay. So
Sure.
before we start, let's say like for people who are watching it, who don't know anything about the design system. So I will give a definition of design system, then you can expand on it. A simplest definition I can think of is a set of reusable assets, as you mentioned. It's just a set of reusable. So how do you phrase it, the definition, in a more comprehensive way?
Okay. I'm thinking because, yeah, there are so many things, but okay. So the definition of a design system for me is a set of reusable components or assets that will help speed the development of any application. And when we talk about design systems, we're not only talking about the design libraries, we are also talking about development libraries. So the composition of a design system is design libraries, development libraries, and documentation, plus community. So really four elements that will compose an entire, a complete definition of a design system in my experience.
Let me break this down a bit, right? So design system consists of 4 parts. One is design libraries, say like components, everything, let's call it for simplicity's sake. And for each design asset or library, relevant development code or at least code guidelines, that will be the coding second part. Because you don't, if I'm right, you if you want to keep it like high level, you can just say like code specifics, being like language agnostic, like just defining variables to be just make it agnostic. So we can say dev library, second one. Third one is documentation, how the design have to be used and how it can be like translated into code. And the last one is community. So can you expand on what you mean by community? Does it mean like internal stakeholders of the design system, or do you mean like a general public community?
No, internal. That's a good question. When I mention community, is the community you are creating internally if the design system is closed for the company internally on the stakeholders, users. And when we talk about design system users, we are talking about other designers, other developers, technical writers, anyone that is consuming the design system. And that will compose the community. And when we talk about community, it means that we will expect or we should have a two-way communication with the people that are consuming the design system. So we understand what are the needs and then can feed it back to the design system. It's a ecosystem of gathering feedback, applying that to the design system and solving the problem that they had. So the community is really having a open channel of communication with the design system consumers.
So it's like continuous feedback loop. Okay, this one we need to expand, and this one we need to change. Maybe the component properties are not clear. So those couples. So okay, let's pull back and just consider. Now we know what the design system is. It's just a composition of four parts that are in design assets, development like translation, and the whole documentation of where to use with the design, how it is translated, and community, meaning continuous feedback. It's like CI/CD integration as in development, but more for the design perspective. Okay, we know what a design system is now for people who are listening in. And what skills do you think a design system person should have that you picked up? Few things you mentioned is consistency. Can they be able to maintain a consistency? Translates to so many things, right? Consistency, and what are the skills do they need?
You're right. From my experience, those four areas will compose a design system. And within those four areas, there are many responsibilities that will play a role. When you talk about design libraries, of course, you're talking about the design field, development libraries, engineering, the documentation. It's a combination of both. It's design, development, and technical writing. Community is advocating for the designers or advocating for the developers. And we have roles as designer advocates and that are becoming more popular now. So it really depends on the field. So focusing on the design field, other skills that are important for a designer other than consistency is also knowing the other areas or to what we were talking before, expanding the skills on development, expanding the skills on documentation, writing, and that will help make the connection between all the disciplines. Those are really important foundations for any designer to grow, any design system designer to grow and continue growing on the career path. So, learning about development, as we were talking before, learning more about how to translate a design that you did into to clear documentation, and also empathy, learning from the users, learning from the community so you can keep improving the design. Those are key areas and skills that a designer in a design system field should grow towards.
So if we translate them into practical skills, right? One thing is ability to keep consistency. Correct me if I say I'm just trying to make it as practical as possible. A consistency can mean a lot of things, right? So
Right.
simplest example is it's not like using the same button copy and paste. It also means the spacing, the minute details, and where you place it. And also, can I say even consistency, meaning ability to think in a bigger picture, may also add into this a skill. Like how many, ability to visualize and mapping out, not just, oh, this is the component, like how many states are there, where they're being used, and which state need to be used when, and ability to think bigger. Shall I say like divergent thinking? Okay. This is the one point. And again, like development skills, like how many cases it can expand, like edge cases, how many things. So that is meant by consistency. So you know, like how much variables, like and how you build a component is the basic, like how many iterations, how much is this component going. Can I say that comes under consistency? That's the practical skill.
Yes, partially. Let's translate consistency into a practical way. I think it's a really important thing to include. When you talk about consistency, it's to your point, not only using the same button over and over again. That's, of course, part of it, but not the main goal behind having a consistent design system. In the technical part of the design system, creating consistency is important for scalability. Let's talk about consistency in nomenclature. So when you are defining a property name or a variable name, you follow a specific nomenclature criteria that you've defined for that given property. And that will scale to other components. So you have consistency in nomenclature. Why is that so important? It's important because that will be translated to code. And when it's translated to code, you have the consistency now in between design and development. And that will also scale in the development field. And it will enable developers to create a robust solution for the components or for the code itself. So there is a tight connection between design and development. We are talking about consistency. And also when we go to the documentation. So let's say we are documenting a component and then the property, the same property that is seen in Figma is also available for the developers in a given component. Let's take the button as an example. We say that we have a primary definition, a primary variant for a button, the same name that's used in the Figma library, and I'm using Figma as a tool for
Mm.
this case, the same name that is in Figma, it's seen on the development, and it's also documented as such in the documentation. It will help with, as I mentioned, moving from design to development, creating a scalable foundation for the libraries, both design and development, and creates a clear channel of communication with whoever is using the design system, helping the community to also communicate back and say, this variant is not working, or how do I use this variant? And then it's always the same nomenclature. This is only one example of how and why consistency is important in the design system.
So basically, it's tokenization. Like, how do you define the tokens? Like, primary, if you define a button component in design system like Figma, example using the tool, with
Mhm.
different states and every colored border, what space it goes. So you should be able to translate into a design system, like in development side, it will be tokens. This is the variable, this is the token. And then also explaining the logic behind the token and how it is being translated in a documentation. So that's one example of consistency. So
Exactly.
do you have any other examples of
Sure.
practices? Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. The one that I just mentioned is more on the technical
Mm.
scope of how to build the design system, but there is the consistency importance when it's applying the components or applying the design system libraries into a product. So the other way to give an example of consistency applied is the products being built with the design system and then the patterns that are established as part of the design system component or as part of a pattern that was established within the design system or within the product structure. And then the users are familiar with that pattern. So that helps with the cognitive load of how they are using. That's another way that consistency plays in the design system and how it's important because it's going to be used And then finally, of course, apply to the product and used to the final user.
So just keep a checkbox as a checkbox, like the square, instead of turning into hardship. Like
Absolutely, yeah. Don't change a radio button to be a square because that will change how the users are familiar with that specific pattern.
so, any other last example you can give in case of consistency for a design system? We talked about tokenization, design patterns, and any third example if you have.
Sure. The other thing that comes to my mind is design language consistency, and that goes more towards the visuals of a UI. So if you have a shape defined for a component, that shape can be cascaded and maybe should be cascaded through other components. If you have a pill shape button, how that translates to other elements of the design system. Would you consider having a more rounded card with a larger corner radius to align better with the button? And I think the answer would be yes, because then when you are adding a button inside a card, you can make the concentric corners nicely aligned. So that is another example of consistency now applied to visuals.
So, just like a visual example, keeping the corner radius consistent. Same with the icons, using same icon styles. Like if we use fill everywhere, if we use sharp corners, make sure everything is sharp corner. So I just so consistency. We dig a we dig a bit more into the practical examples.
Yeah,
So development, translation, and documentation we already covered in a part of tokenization under consistency. You meant empathy, right? Like continuous feedback and continuous maintenance. So can you expand a bit on it? Like how do they gather the feedback? Do they test the components? Like what is the process of maintenance of the design system? What are the like particular skills?
sure. Giving some context on the evolution of the design system,
Mm.
there is the governance process on how to incorporate changes into the system. And then there is a flow that is established on how the feedback that we are receiving from users, either designers or developers, will be incorporated into it. And the first question that we ask is, have you looked at the documentation? Is that covered by the current scenarios? So that would be one of the first questions that we go through. And then there is a solution in play, then just pointing out and helping to solve the case. If it's a really new feature or a gap or a missing part of the component, then we will evaluate what is the impact of that change to the component itself and to the components that are impacted by that change. And depending on how it goes, it will define if we're implementing or not. Another question is that change is specific to that scenario, or is that something that can be reused by other products as well? If the answer is that is only for that product, make that an isolated solution, as we call it, is no core, and that will not live within the design system. If it's something that really benefits everyone, then we incorporate into the pipeline of design and development for including the design system. So a that is the flow in a nutshell. There is much more behind that, but that's the foundation to your question of what are the necessary skills for that. And I did mention empathy because it is important to one understands where the designer or developer is coming from. what is the context that they are trying to, what is the context that they are working on, and what is the problem that they are trying to solve. And many times, the request is not actually the solution of what they are trying to solve. Sometimes it's another component. Sometimes it's a gap on knowledge and they don't know there is another component that solves what they are trying to solve. And it ends up into the training and education and providing more information. Sometimes a gap in the documentation. So empathy really helps on putting their shoes and understand what they are facing. And then with that, we will really understand what is the core, what is the root cause of that request. And we will be able to provide a better solution, either, as I mentioned, training or documentation or an explanation, or, of course, an improvement in the design system.
So other skill is like actually understanding, like in a proper UX research kind of skill. What's the problem? Is it like, do we have an existing solution, or how we can, like, what's the root problem? Is it a communication, actual design system gap, or is it a unique pattern that doesn't need to be in the design system but can be
Right.
localized? So those are the skills. So any other skills you think of before we go back to portfolio now? Like I want to go back to portfolio. Do you think
Sure.
that's an important skill they need to have?
I think what you mentioned, like it is connected with research because that's what one of the responsibilities of a researcher. It's understanding and solving, trying to answer a question and providing insights to how to solve that question. So it is another skill that can be translated. And I am summarizing researcher in a super short set of skills. I know it's much more than that, but it can be translated to what we are talking. Yes.
So let's go back to a case study, right? So now we talked about four components of the design system: was design, development, documentation, continuous feedback, and maintenance. They're all four interconnected. And we also talked about the skill set. They're also interconnected. One of the main skills is consistency, but we also expanded on the context, like what they mean by consistency, feedback, research, all those stuff. So let's say, how do someone structure a case study? Or say, let's say three case studies, three different scenarios. I know design system, you can say like whole design system, there's a huge part. So how do you scope it? A case study on your portfolio or someone doing a side project? Because sometimes you can't actually publish a design system, it's strictly internal. Okay, let's take one case study, right? So let's say in this scenario, let's build upon a case study 2 is built on case study 1, case study 3 is built on case study 2 and 1. So let's say a fictional example from a hiring manager, the skills you saw, different portfolios. So what is the simplest case study? Say case study 1, just like an outline they can build for a design system portfolio. What is the scope? How do they scope it?
Okay. So if you have experience in design system, if you have worked in the design system, highlight that as part of the first case,
Mm-hmm.
obviously. If you don't, and if you don't have experience with design systems yet, transferring the skills that you've applied to previous jobs to everything that you're talking right now would be the best case to highlight the transferable skills that we were talking before. So if you have had experience working with developers and the importance of consistency within development, highlight that in a case. And it doesn't need to be an extensive case. It sometimes is a portion of a major case. So instead of doing an entire case with the whole flow of isolate the portion that is connected to design system library, development, documentation, or community, that will generate a case by itself to highlight those skills. That would be my suggestion. And most of the times, when I look at portfolio cases, I will identify those throughout an entire case, coming from the user journey up to the personas and then the ideation, the wireframes, and everything. That is a complete case. From there, you can extract a portion of that and create a case focused on one of those four areas that we are talking about.
So it also helps with maintaining the complexity and time management. So let's say fictionally, I'm developing a design system case study. And so let's say I'm preparing a separate portfolio or like a design system set of case studies. So I have five different products which I want to redesign, passion projects I did. So be like UI audit, I will call in the design system, defining the scope of the design system. So the
Yeah.
case study one is all about how did I define the scope of the design system. Case study two is build upon case study one, that is like defining the typography, the scales, and the buttons. And also define like how I attached the documentation of design perspective. Where should I use the primary color? If there were two colors, which components did I use accent color? Just like a brief documentation, like how I define. Case study two. Case study three, we said three case studies. Case study three would be more about like development and documentation. Say, how did I define the tokens? Translate design into dev. And you
Yeah.
don't need to actually write the code. Even for the developers, if there are different developers, different languages using the design system, you could say, this is the variable, CSS variable. This is how the variable name is defined and how it is using. If someone knows coding, the root variable is used. You know what I'm talking about. We both have development backgrounds. So the CSS, like the SAS variables and those. So that would be the case study three. Am I right? That's how one
That's a
whole
perfect
design system.
example. Yeah, that's a perfect example on how to organize and break down the cases to connect with a design system case. I love it.
Thank you. Hope you hire me for your design system. Joke though. But yeah, so we covered a lot on this topic. I think, Andre, we discussed about the skills, we discussed about the portfolio. So, just closing off this session. So, I know like we talked about a generalist design system expert, right? Basic level, let's say. So, what would be the senior design system expert portfolio is expected to have apart from the generalist, like, or a mid level role? What other things would you expect to see on their portfolio?
Yep. So the more a designer grow within the design system scope, it can either go the more specialist, for example, someone that will be specialized on accessibility or technical writer or iconography designer. That can be one way to grow within the career, being a specialist, or you can grow towards a leadership position. And within the leadership position, then gaining more skills on other areas, like others that we mentioned before, learning how code works, to have a good relationship and connection with developers. That is a natural growth. From my perspective, it's really two paths. One being an specialist and deep diving in a topic and area, and then making the career path within that area and then growing to an expert level within that area, or growing towards a leadership position and gaining more skills and learning about the whole scope of the system.
So, just a final question. So, say someone want to be a full stack design system expert, that is still possible, right? Like someone is very good, like thing. So, and they don't want to be completely, when you say leadership, right, the first thing that comes into my mind is management, where someone enjoys to be in the weeds and still be a leader, but like not a complete leadership. Is it still a career path? Can someone still be like a principal design system? Do you think is there a role like principal designer? Like,
Yes, there is. In fact, in my team, I have a principal designer, yes. And that is not a manager position. It is a technical position that is growing towards a broader knowledge, as I mentioned before, and has this knowledge and connection with all the areas within design, areas within development. And that's how a designer can grow towards a principal level. It's really gaining knowledge in several areas and mentoring and providing guidance to other team members.
So I know, like, when I say this thing, right, there will be one biggest question in everyone's head: the finances. So, can someone be a principal or individual contributor and still earn as much money as a director of the design? Or do you think if someone needs to have money and they'd like to be in weights, so is it like a mutually exclusive or inclusive option? What I meant was, do they need to, like, for money, do they need to let go of specialization and become into management? Or can they still be specialized and earn the same amount of money? What do you think from the experience?
I don't think anyone needs to move to management to keep growing on their career path. It's option, of course, but I don't think it's connected with budgets or it's not connected with salary. And if you'd like to keep growing in the technical career path, you should. And you don't have any interest in managing people, focus on the technical area, focus on the areas that you like the most. And the more you grow, the more you will also expand your knowledge, and that will be ideally transferable to an equivalent salary. So from my perspective is keep growing on the technical area if you like that the most, and the more you grow, ideally, it's connected with a salary. So I don't think there is a direct correlation.
I think we came to the end of the section. So, as a closing off comment, do you have any key takeaways, any comments on the conversation we have so far?
Sure. So thank you so much for having me here again. It was a pleasure, really nice talking with you. I would say design systems are well established right now. If you're looking for a position in the design system, look for cases that you've built before and how you can transfer them to the design system scope and give a try. Try it out and grow on the area. I think the more you grow in your skills, you learn more, and then find the area that you like the most and grow in your career path.
That's perfect. Thank you so much, Andre. And